discussion on leadership. It is my honor to host today someone who has, your family particularly, has made such a positive impact, and this is Lieutenant Colonel Devon Blake, who has been in charge of the Army, the soldiers at Goodfellow, and unfortunately, as a part of your life and our lives, you are fixing to leave us soon for your next stage of your life, which is quite exciting, actually, to go to the Pentagon to be you say the title,
Deputy Executive Officer to the Chief of Staff of the Army.
And that means there are 4 stars on his shirt. And you will be
making coffee.
That is not true. I have watched the Chief of Staff's assistants who keep them sane by organizing and whispering in their ear important things they need to know. What an incredible opportunity, and one I'm very excited for your wonderful family with your husband and 4 children to get to live in probably a place. It is one of the prettiest, I believe, military sites in the world. It's small. Fort Myer there in D.C. Those very few homes built turn of the century or back between Civil War, looking down over the Capitol, Washington Monument, Lincoln Memorial, and you all, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Staff of each of the services, as well as the Secretary for each of the services live there, and you and your family are going to get to have a great experience. We've discussed how there won't be a lot of children, so I am thrilled that the Blake children will be riding bicycles in that historic compound and will be in charge of Fort Myer.
Look out, Fort Myer.
I am excited for that experience for them.
Thank you. We are so humbled to be able to go.
Yeah, and to live there. You have just, let me give our audience just a very brief update on your background. Grew up in Massachusetts and then went to West Point and majored in engineering. And you've been deployed 3 times, Afghanistan, Iraq, Kuwait, and other than assignments. And now to have, well, it's a leadership position here at Goodfellow, certainly being over the soldiers there. But now, what an amazing opportunity to watch the leadership of the Department of Defense, all the branches. Have you been stationed at the Pentagon?
I have not.
Do you have a good sense of direction, because you're going to need it, or a GPS?
Give me a map and a compass and I'm okay.
You know, I think Glenn Middle School being in round pods is difficult until they painted color strips. But the Pentagon is just such a maze of...
It is.
And so much going on there. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have 6 questions that I want to pick your brain, and our audience will learn, I know, a lot from your perspective. Who have you modeled your style of leadership after, and why? And it may be more than one person.
Okay. Great question to start out with. To be very, very frank, I model my leadership after Christ. I'm a strong believer in selfless service and servant leadership and transparency. So I believe that what you see is what you get 24/7, in uniform, out of uniform, and there is nothing that I would ask my soldiers to do that I wouldn't do myself. So it's not to say an easy role model by any stretch of the imagination, but it's very clear how to lead. I think he set the perfect example, and I try, don't always succeed, but that's how I model my daily leadership.
Wow, good for you. Besides decreasing funding that the military is being hit so hard, and our staff understands, we started our major cuts over 3 years ago, and y'all are hot and being hit hard with it. Besides that challenge, what are the greatest challenges of leadership right now for you?
Time. Time is the greatest challenge, and I found there are 1,200 soldiers in our battalion, which is really just a snippet of the big Army Department of Defense. But in order to lead successfully and to lead effectively, time with soldiers is so important. So what I've found is I'll always make time for soldiers, and then the admin piece is what gets me in the long run. So that time management, and with the philosophy I try and instill within the leaders within the battalion to make time and always make time for soldiers, for their soldiers. And when they do that, I think it's a rippling effect, laying a foundation so that soldiers understand it's about team, it's about making time for one another in order to succeed and to move forward. So for me, that's the biggest leadership challenge, is finding and making that time for what's important and recognizing some things can wait. I'm not an office style leader. There is plenty that I have to do behind the computer, and it always gets done. But I always ask myself at night, did I make time for really what was important, which is people?
I think any successful leader would have that on their short list of challenges.
Right.
Certainly is for me. Mm-hmm. What are your problem-solving steps when you have conflict among your staff?
So the first thing I'll do is pull the individuals in, and normally I'll talk to them one-on-one. I think there's 3 sides to every story. So I'll hear one side, I'll hear another story, and really gather the facts, find out what's factual, what may have been the root of the problem, and what may be emotional. And there's sometimes too much emotion gets involved, and so I'll stick to the facts. And then oftentimes I'll bring the two together and talk to both of them, lay the facts out, put the emotion aside, and recognize we need to be mature. We're professionals. If you don't want to be part of this profession, then you can go get a different job. But it's not a job, it's a profession, and we need to own that. So, and then if it's not resolved between the two at that level, the next thing I'll ask them to do is to reverse roles. And so they walk in the other person's boots for a day, and then they recognize the challenges that individual may be facing, the decisions that they've had to make, and potentially why there was conflict in the first place, so that they can empathize with the other person. So that the methodology has worked most of the time, and sometimes people just have to agree to disagree, and then put it behind them, shake hands, forgive one another for whatever that fault may be, and then move forward. And recognizing it's really for the greater good of the organization not to have that conflict, and to put, normally it's a selfish reason, but to put that aside and then recognize how do we resolve this and move forward. Another method is to ask them to resolve. How would they resolve if they were the other person? Or put yourself in my shoes, okay? So being the decision maker, tell me, if you were me, how would you fix the problem? And ask them to make suggestions on how to resolve their own issues. So.
It's a very deep, rarely is it simple.
Never. You're right.
And even if it looks simple at first blush, it's very deep to the individuals. How do you get people to follow you and buy into your leadership?
Leadership by example. We ask a lot of our soldiers, We ask them to get up many hours before the sun comes up most days, and we are standing in formation every day at 5:30 in the morning, every soldier, and so during that morning time, obviously not everybody likes mornings, and but to lead by example, I'm actually a night owl, and I don't like mornings, but every morning I will get up and I will make sure that I'm present at that time, and they recognize that this is important. We're doing physical training, and this is part of being a soldier. We have, and the Army pays us to stay in shape so that we can be prepared when the time comes. And so that's just one example, the leadership by example. But whether it's combatives training, whether it's firing weapons, always striving to do my best, but at the same time, I think they recognize that I wouldn't ask them, as I said earlier, I wouldn't ask them to do something that I wouldn't do myself. And then going the extra mile. If a soldier, we talk a lot about balance. And the Army defines 5 pillars, and there are many, but the Army has defined 5 in a tool. It's called the Global Assessment Tool, and we are required annually to do a self-assessment, which I think is really, really important in any profession to take, and not just by the book when the Army says to do a self-assessment, but I challenge all of the soldiers to continually self-assess whether or not they're balanced. And so the 5 pillars that the Army defines are your social, your physical, your emotional, your spiritual, and family. So I ask them to do a self-check and say, am I out of balance? Am I spending too much time in one of these areas? And then to keep each other accountable. And there are times where I'm way off balance. Just ask my husband. And he puts me back in check. But,
I won't ask him that question.
Probably not. But I try and remain balanced. And sometimes it may mean that I have to leave work. So they see me leave work at 6. Mm-hmm. I'll go home and spend the time with the family. And it may mean putting the kids to bed, having dinner, putting the kids to bed, even if I have to come back late at night in order to finish what I need to finish. Because if I'm there, oftentimes the junior soldiers will stay. They won't leave before the leadership leaves. And again, just ensuring that they are taking care of themselves, and in turn they can take care of their families and remain balanced across those pillars. And we all surge at different times, and there's differing levels where we have to balance those out. But I think that's a big piece in ensuring that they're doing that self-check, I'm doing that self-check, and then we're holding each other accountable on all levels. And if you see somebody out of whack and you say, maybe you should put in for leave or take a pass and just spend time with your family. Mm-hmm. We'll take care of your soldiers for you while you're gone. And then I see other individuals stepping up, helping each other to fill that gap so that individuals can balance.
Because we're all going to need that at some point.
We all do. You're right. Absolutely.
When you're looking for potential people to promote or encourage, mm-hmm. what leadership qualities are critical for someone to possess?
Number 1 is integrity. And as the saying goes, trust can take a long time to earn, but can be lost in a second. Mm-hmm. And for us, especially within our field, it is extremely important that the trust and integrity is there, especially in light of recent incidents with Snowden mm-hmm. and Manning, and we've seen them in the paper. It's so critical that somebody's integrity is in check, and I tell the soldiers, I will trust you until you give me a reason not to. Mm-hmm. I'll trust you with my life. Literally, I would lay down my life for you, as I know they would for me, and so the integrity piece is huge. I also believe the selfless service piece is even more huge. Right along with the integrity. Because if they're not serving selflessly, then why are we in this uniform? And so I ask them to ensure that they're in the uniform for the right reason. Character goes right along with that. They have to have the character in order to progress and ensure again that they're representing more than just themselves. And it's so important because our profession is about people. So very, very important. And then probably the last critical, there are so many, but the last critical quality is humility. And I see some folks that climb the ladder and they'll kind of push other people down as they go up. And I always say, they're looking up and not recognizing that we really need to be focusing on those that we are serving. And the greater the scope of responsibility, the more we should be serving, not being served. So it's regardless of position, regardless of military, I believe in any leader in any position should recognize the humbling responsibility that we have when we are called to be in a position of leadership, and the expectation that subordinates have, and that we should be serving them.
I think one of the reasons the leaders that I've observed, whether in my profession or in our nation, that fail, it's because as they move up, power then corrupts, and those lessons that they might have learned at their mother's knee or in school or in church, for some reason they are back in the background, and that they don't hear those, their conscience doesn't tug them anymore. So would you share before I do the last question, I didn't realize right before this interview, that part of your time while you were deployed, you had an opportunity
Sure, that it was.
to not just be in the war of Afghanistan and Iraq, but worked, what do you say? What's the verb?
Detention operations.
You were in detention operations with some of the leaders of our nation's enemies.
True.
Can you just tell us a little bit about that?
I can. Very, very fascinating, very psychologically interesting to engage with the senior leaders of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and other opposing groups to the United States, and recognizing, truly a test of recognizing and appreciating and actioning dignity and respect in an environment where I know that these individuals harmed or killed my brothers and sisters in arms and fellow Americans. And my goal was to show them unconditional love. And there is no translation in the Afghan language, in Dari or Pashto, which are the languages spoken in Afghanistan. There is absolutely zero translation for unconditional love. So to explain it, many of them did not understand, but to show that was my goal, and recognize, as a human, I respect you. But I expect the dignity and respect in return. And I could talk for a long time on this, but I think as a leader, probably one of the most valuable years of my life, in being able to have the opportunity to positively influence and impact, again, these senior leaders within these organizations, recognizing that they had never known Americans, they didn't know the enemy, and no excuse. But my goal during that time and my role was to change them from hating Americans to becoming, my goal was neutral, if not pro-American. And by doing that, the first step was to change the culture within the detention facility. And in order to do that, to change that culture, the guards had to adapt and own that philosophy of dignity and respect, because there was a definitive mutual hatred between the guard and those that were being guarded. And again, they're not going to like each other, but they can respect one another. And what I found was the riots stopped. We provided incentive for positive behavior. When you reward good, people do good. When you expect them to do good, they do good. When you expect them to act up and act negatively, they meet your expectation. So the expectation was the respect and that they will behave. And the climate changed tremendously. And then offering, if you do good, I'm going to give you an education, because the illiteracy rate within that facility is 93%. And so when you have a population of extremists, one that couldn't read the Quran and were just told. So if you took the Bible out of context and you talked about much of what's in the Bible taken out of context, could certainly be misperceived if you didn't have the background, the knowledge, the study. And if you were being told one thing and that is what you believe from a cleric or from a pastor or whomever, you become almost desensitized to reality and what it really stands for. And so understanding Islam became part of my mission as a Christian, to understand their faith and the underlying peaceful tenets within their religion, and then to approach them in a manner such that I could speak their language in a sense and approach them because of that, knowing where they were at and their extremist mentality. So, for example, sharing with them that we've put a man on the moon, to them was absolutely absurd. There is no way we could ever have, you look at the moon, there's no way we could ever have put a man on the moon. And so sharing with them basic knowledge that our young children have, they'd never been exposed because they didn't have any type of education. And once they recognize, so if somebody came into your home, a foreign or a fellow American came into your home, and you lived in a tribal area, a mud hut that didn't have electricity, didn't have TV, didn't have any type of news or books, or, I mean, you're isolated. You're just trying to survive. And somebody comes by, the Taliban, for example, and says, there are foreigners in our country that are taking away our religion, they're taking away our children, they're taking away our families and our way of life. We need to defend this. And so most of the fighters pick up arms in order to defend their tribe, to defend what they know. Many of them adopt the extremist mentality from those that are recruiting them based on that simple message. So they identify and they think of an American as an enemy, yet they know nothing about us. And again, not an excuse, but a similar strategy as I shared with you by putting yourself in somebody else's shoes when there's a conflict. And so I tried to put myself in their shoes, and I talked to them. Tell me why did you pick up arms, and why did you fight, and why did you kill, ending up obviously as a detainee. And so there's story after story after story where complete ignorance existed. And once they're educated, so many gained that respect for why we were in their country and what we were doing. And so changing that mentality and watching them begin to speak positive about why the Americans were there, and then to help. And for those that were released, and this is during the time I was there, I can't speak for when I wasn't, were definitely neutral, if not pro-American, and committed to not picking up arms. Now, recidivism did decrease, recidivism being those that did pick up arms. The recidivism rate prior to that was much higher and did decrease over time with those that were released after that climate had changed. I can't take all the credit. Certainly a big team that bought into the idea and recognized the importance of what we needed to do to change hearts and minds. That's
wow.
Fascinating, but a lot of stories.
So
and a lot of
fascinating.
A really neat experience.
Okay, my last question.
Yes, ma'am.
What do you hope your legacy will be? Either at Goodfellow, you're so young, you may not be thinking long term, but I think we ought to be thinking what is, and not just working on today's task. You in Afghanistan were trying to change long term their understanding. So what do you hope as a leader in the Army, you hope your legacy will be?
People value people and take care of people. We're in a people business, if I can use the term business. But that people value people for who they are and recognize that everyone can contribute. And recognize the good. And some people don't get it. I'm not naive. And some people, this profession is not for them, and that's okay. But I respect that the majority of our soldiers today raised their right hand in a time of war. They took an oath to defend the Constitution of the United States, and that means something. So if you took that first step, they went through their initial stages of training toward becoming a professional, and then recognizing that each of those soldiers has value. Every soldier in ours, there are 1.1 million soldiers between the National Guard, the Reserves, and active duty right now. And in understanding, okay, as leaders, we need to value and never forget where we came from. So that would be my
That's
my
what you're modeling. Well, I wish your family such the best. I hope and pray as that I can stay at least in touch enough to watch those 4 precious Blake children become all that they were created to be. You have been such a blessing to this city. Thank you so much.
Well, I have to throw in there, this city has been a blessing, not just to our family, but to all the military families. And I've said it before, I'm very sincere when I say that there is something so special about San Angelo. It is so different than even the most military cities that I've lived in. And I thank you for your leadership, your passion for not only your leaders, but for every child, watching you interact and recognize that every child does matter. And it's not just your words, but I've seen you in action. And that is very special as well.
There's some pretty wonderful children
Yes,
in this city.
Yes, there are.
And we've been blessed to have for 2 years the Blake family.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.